Okay, so we missed the beginning, but but when we talk about it and we talk about the thing to key into is how did I get to the realizations that I've gotten to make positive changes or engage in ways that are positive for me, right? So how did I get there? Right? How was I able to formulate it, to think about things, to look at my experience in a way that I can benefit from? Because one of the big, I think, misnomers in general is that we learn from experience. So we potentially can learn from experience, but experience in and of itself doesn't teach us anything and oftentimes teaches us the wrong thing. Um, so what we have to look at is understand how did we learn from experience? What were the things inside of us that helped us learn from our own experiences? How did we test those things out? How do we start to feel control? That's what you want to sort of move to the person that you're helping. That's what you want to give them. The ability to do that, the ability to be able to empower themselves in a way that is useful. Now, there are a lot of things you can do inside of that. You can be supportive. You can affirm how they're feeling about things. You can validate people's feelings. You can help them process and think through what their conclusions are. But it's all got to come to them. As soon as you say, well, I think you should quit your job, so to speak, using just that, then you're not really doing them a favor. Because really what you want to say is, you seem unhappy with your job. What keeps you there? What other options do you have? What can you do to make that situation better? What can you do to help them see that maybe this is a toxic environment for them that they need to come up with another plan for? That's way harder, but also way more valuable than saying, well, based on what you said, I think you should quit your job. Um, so when we think about advice, sometimes we give it and sometimes it's appropriate. Um, Sometimes we can offer it saying it's your choice, but, so it's like the opt in thing with the textbooks, right? So I personally think it's easier and better to opt in. That's my opinion. But whether you choose to opt in or buy the materials on your own is your choice completely. And you need to make it based on whatever things that you evaluate to make that choice. What hopefully I can give you is maybe ways and information that helps you evaluate that, and you make whatever choice you make. And you own that, and that's the way it should be. And that's kind of what we're moving towards. So I did want to bring that up because I see that oftentimes. And, people say, oh, I'm here because people say I give good advice. Okay. Um, I would say that it's great to be able to give good advice, but that's really not what we're in the business of doing. So, any thoughts, comments, ideas about that? How does that strike you? So, why don't you put in the chat section kind of how that strikes you, what you think of that? Does that make sense to you? And it doesn't have to. So one thing I would say in class is you do not have to agree with me. I'm perfectly comfortable with that. It will not impact you in any way. All right. So I see some of you are typing. Okay. Nadia says it makes sense. Okay. All right. All right. It makes sense. All right. Oh, you are an agreeable bunch. Okay. Okay. So, which is okay. I do agree with it. Okay. Giving advice is good at times, depending on how some people take it, but can also be bad in a way. You have to pick and choose, I would say, about when to give advice, how to give advice, and even how you frame it. Right. So there's a lot of ways to think about that. So, all right. All right. Very good. So, okay. Anthony says, yeah, I understand. Makes sense. Okay. Just keep that in your head, right? Just think about that. And, sort of go from there. So the second thing I want to talk about is ethics is a really important topic in any profession. And I would argue in life. And unfortunately, I would argue that ethics, unfortunately, is not followed often enough in our world, right? People act in unethical ways, and it can be disturbing. But there isn't a whole lot that we can necessarily do with that. But, one of the things that you'll see, and it's even in the class, right? There are ethical standards, which we need to have and are appropriate, and I'm totally supportive of them. But just learning about ethical standards doesn't make you an ethical person. If you are doing something because some standard tells you to do it and that's your reason, then to me, that doesn't really go deep enough. Okay. What you need to, okay. Okay. Thanks for muting there. I think I got you for class. I'll have your name twice. All right. So ethics, right? So when we think about ethics, we have to have what are the basic fundamental underpinnings of ethics that drive what we think is right or wrong that we can then use as a basis to understand these ethical statements that are made, right? Does our underpinning basic ethical beliefs and values align with the standards? Because if they don't, we need to figure that out, right? We just do, right? We need to come up with a way to understand that, to make sense of it, because you will be held to those ethical standards in a professional setting, hopefully. Not always the case. And the thing to know too is that we as humans, and this is one of our, I think, flaws that we have, is we tend to be more conformist than we sometimes give ourselves credit for. We get into groups of people and we tend to absorb the ethics of whatever that group is. And if we really don't fit, we tend to leave those groups. And there's some logic to that, of course. So the same thing is true when you work, right? When you get a job. Every job you work in, every organization you work for, has a culture. And inside of the culture is where the ethical standards kind of live. Regardless of what the standards say on some external piece of paper, they get, what's the right way to put this? They get translated inside of this culture. So you always have to be aware of that because we can easily get co-opted by the organization. And I'll give you an example. I remember going to a meeting. It was an outside meeting of an organization I was working with, and we went to lunch as a group or dinner. I can't remember if it was lunch or dinner. Doesn't really matter. So we were kind of in a social setting, and some of the people there started to speak derogatorily about the population of people that the organization was serving. And they did it as if it was a quote unquote joke. And I remember this because it was disturbing to me, because it showed a lack of respect for the people we were trying to support. But it seemed to be part of the culture of at least this section of the organization. And so if you asked all those people whether they felt they were ethical, my guess is they would say yes, but there was an underpinning culture of, in a sense, degrading the people we were serving. And that happens. And what we have to do is we have to recognize that and think about, well, how do I respond to those kinds of things? And what do they mean? And, will I be susceptible to the pressure? And I would say that one of the things that allows us to resist that kind of, what's the right word for it? Just kind of going along to get along, or going along to fit in, or going along to not get in trouble, or however you want to sort of frame it, is to really have a strong sense of where we derive our ethical fundamental values from, and to see whether the organization and those values connect, and to see how we can be supportive of the values, even if they and the ethics they talk about, versus what really happens. So there's a lot kind of going on here. And I really, really want you to be prepared and to think about that, right? So one of the things that I did is, I posted some stuff. I doubt you've read it yet, just because I just posted it and got it ready yesterday. But there's a discussion question coming up for the second learning plan, which comes from the book Choose Compassion. So the book, chapter 3, is 4 pages long. So I know you can all read 4 pages, right? So not a big push, but in it they talk about this notion of compassion, and how that what we have in a sense are circles of compassion. So in other words, what they're saying is that we feel more compassionate, or a sense of compassion, for people who are inside of our circle. So for instance, your family, right? For those of you, you'll probably all have families in one way or another. Hopefully you have good relationships with your family, but I know how families can be. There's a line from Tolstoy. If anybody's ever read Anna Karenina, the book opens with the statement, he writes something to the extent of, all happy families are the same, all unhappy families are unhappy in their own way. And what he's getting at, in my opinion, although not everybody agrees with my interpretation of this, and I would say this is true for any kind of organization or culture, is that there really is no such thing as a quote unquote happy family. All families struggle, they go through things, there are difficult relationships inside of them, there are conflicts that come up in them. And they're all unique to those environments. So, again, we need to think about that as we think about ethics, that kind of uniqueness that kind of goes in there. So there is that. But what they talk about too is that we tend to feel compassion for a circle of people, and we will act in compassionate manners towards them. The further you get from that circle, the less compassion we tend to act, right? Unless it's something that is like gigantic, where like the fires in Los Angeles, where everybody hears about it, they know about it, and lots of people want to help. They act compassionately towards those things. But the other thing that happens is then there are groups that what I call other. And when I use the word other, what that refers to is we see them as different than ourselves, right? As in some way, shape, or form different. And so that they become less human than we are, and less deserving of or giving of our compassion. And that the further away people get from that compassion scale, or that circle of compassion, the less ethical we feel we have to act towards them. So this is really important, I think, and a way to think about this, because I think it's true. I would say that in my experience, that is true. And we see this that happens in our country all the time. So take any group that you sort of want to, I've had this argument about people who are substance abusers as an example. And argument's a bad word, discussion, shall we say, or conversation. And the idea being, well, drug users chose to take drugs, so why should I feel bad for them, using that kind of language? Feeling bad's a bad word. Why should I feel compassion for them? They did this, they had a choice, they didn't have to take drugs. So therefore I don't have to be as compassionate to them. And so now my response to them maybe is not as ethical, or there are things I might do or not do because of that, right? So, and somehow or other, what we have to do is we have to open up our compassionate selves to everybody. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to approve of everybody's behavior. So, someone in their paper wrote something to the effect of, I need to work on acceptance because people who commit crimes, I don't like people who commit crimes. It's not how they put it, but that was kind of where they were going. And so you can feel compassion for somebody and their situation without approving of what they have done, right? The two don't have to go hand in hand. So when we think about acceptance, we can think about understanding that I can feel compassion because of their situation without having to approve of their behavior. So if you're working with someone who's a domestic abuser, I don't approve of domestic abuse. But if I was working with someone, I can I can feel compassion towards them, work with them, hopefully with the goal being that they won't feel this need to abuse people anymore. Right? I mean, that's what I'm aiming at. And not to tell them they're a bad person, because that's really not going to work most likely, but to be able to feel that whatever situation, whatever led them to this, I have no idea. I don't know. I have not been in their selves. And so we can absorb this in there and we can start to act in a way where we have acceptance and we are going to be more ethically inclined in working with them in the actions that we take. Okay. So, does this make sense to you? I mean, do you kind of understand it? Do you have questions about it? Are there pieces of it that don't work or fit for you? So, write something to me in the chat so I have an idea. Okay, so hard to swallow, right? Um, okay, I'll come back to that, but certainly a reasonable response. Okay, anybody else? Come on, tell me how you think. I can handle it. Okay, okay, Tiffany, what's how you feel? Like Christy? Well, what I'm saying is that it's not so much about accepting the person. Acceptance and compassion are two different things. But I mean, I think you're in the right direction. What I'm talking about is feeling, literally feeling compassion, engaging in an action that's going to relieve them of distress. That you can still do that and um, not not condone their actions. Right? That's those two things are possible at the same time. So Amber writes, I understand and it makes sense, but it's hard to do because sometimes we are so judgmental. So Amber, that is a fantastic comment. I just want to say that because I am not up here saying that, okay, I've said this, now you can do it. What I'm saying is that you should consider thinking about things this way and try to practice doing it, understanding that it is difficult and that there are times when you won't be good at it for whatever set of reasons, and that that's okay. But rather than giving into, I just can't accept that, you have to work at practicing that. It's kind of one of those kinds of things, right? We have to in a sense be in touch with where we are on any moment in time to understand how well we can do it, right? Not only do you think it's harder to do, Kasia, I would say it is very hard to do. So none of this is easy. But if you really want to be a helper and work with vulnerable populations, it isn't just about quote unquote cultural competence. And we should be culturally competent. Again, don't take that the wrong way. And we should be accepting of other cultures. But what I'm saying to you is that we have to be able to feel compassion for someone's situation and act in a way that relieves their struggle, even if we don't particularly approve of their actions that they've taken till that point. So Christy asks, is it possible for someone who is also disturbed themselves So I don't really recognize the concept of quote unquote disturbed. I'm not really sure what that means, Christy. So let me reframe that for you to answer that question. So I would argue that everybody is capable of compassion, that it is a universal human trait. We can engage in it or not, just like we're all capable of cruelty, but we can choose not to engage in it. We can choose not to value it. We can choose not to be that way, right? So the way I would look at that, and to answer your question, is that we work with people to assist them to rethink or to reevaluate or to process their experience to be able to move and think in different ways. Because what does it mean to be disturbed? Is that a thinking problem? Is that a cognitive issue? Is that, I mean, again, you know, it's not really language I'm comfortable with. I see a person, who they are at the moment, as a result of a series of events and things that happen, and they are this at that period in time. Being compassionate to them, working to help them is what we do. And therefore, it's always possible. It doesn't mean they're always going to end up there because we cannot control what another person does. Really, they're always making their own choices. They may follow along and people get caught up in movements and all sorts of crazy things. And you see that all the time. But we empower people to have choices, and we work with people so they can process and understand themselves better, and so they can do the hard work. Does that help answer your question, Christy? Okay, and that's a good question. So I appreciate that. I do want to go back to the first comment. Do you believe that the life someone has lived, is it possible for them to have more compassion and not be judgmental? We'll talk about judgmental. That's a big question and a good question. But I'll come back to that. And we'll talk about what it really means to be non-judgmental, or the way I would define it, and how hard that is. But I want to go back to Christie's comment. Right. So it says it does, but some of it is hard to swallow. And so the answer is, yeah, sometimes it's hard to accept these kinds of things, right? That is understandable. And we have to work at it, and we have to try to make sense of it. We have to understand our own way of thinking about it. None of these things I ever talk about here are easy. I do not want to give you the impression that they are. They're complicated. But if you really want to be a helper, you got to think about these things, right? And you got to practice them. And I don't mean just practice them for class. You have to take this stuff and take it into your life and practice it. So I'll give you an example, for me, about small things. So we're trying to sell our house here. And so we had an open house on Sunday. And my wife, who's very picky about the house, was highly stressed. And so she was picking at me, pick this up, do this, do this, do this, just kind of, and so I was kind of rolling with it. And we got in the car. And she said, sorry, I was being bitchy, which I hate that word. So I said, first of all, you're never a bitchy. Get that out of your vocabulary. I said to her, I understand that you were feeling stressed about open house and that the house had to look in a certain way. And, when you get stressed, I mean, I've been married for over 38 years. So, we know each other pretty well at this point. I know that you get short. And when things aren't exactly done the minute you want them, it increases your anxiety level. I mean, I know that, right? So I had a choice, right? I could act by getting upset, why you say, I know what we have to do. I know how to do it. I'm not a child. I could have responded in that way. I chose not to. I chose to practice I chose to respond in a compassionate way by saying, I understand where you're coming from. I appreciate the fact that you recognize you were stressed. And, we just need to move on and kind of go from there. And that was just an action, right? So that is not necessarily my immediate emotional reaction. My immediate emotional reaction might be to say, stop nagging me, right? I mean, but I was conscious of that. I had an awareness of it because I worked to practice it all the time. Small things. A lot of you talked about the idea of compassion, about being compassionate about big things. I would argue to you that what you want to do is you practice on small things. My wife has a bad knee, and our laundry is downstairs in the basement. So, what I try to do is when I know she's doing laundry, I try to go and get the laundry basket and bring it upstairs, although she can do it and will do it. I know that it's harder for her because her knee is really bad and walking up and down stairs, especially with a laundry basket, hurts. It's a small thing. It's still an act of compassion. By practicing it, I have recognition of it and I act on it. And it impacts my moral perspective, my ethical perspective, and how I see the idea of what doing good means and the importance of it and the outcome from it. And so as helpers, that's where you need to get yourself in some way at that point, right? That's what I would urge you to consider, right? You got to do it. You could also take all of this and say, boy, this teacher I have, he's kind of nutty and he says all these crazy things and, whatever. And that's your choice. You make that choice. I have no control over it and you need to decide what to do. But I hope you think about it. So, all right. So David writes, and I want to get back to this because I think it's an important comment. Do you believe that the life someone has lived, is it possible for them to have more compassion and not be judgmental? So here's my thing on judgment and being judgmental. We as humans are designed to be judgmental. It is built deep into our DNA. It's a survival mechanism. And if you think about humans who lived on the, in a hunter-gatherer society, in a pretty dangerous world where you were prey for large animals, perhaps, and we lived in separate tribal environments, you had to look and make judgments about what was around you all the time to be able to survive. So we've carried that evolutionary kind of heritage inside of us. So by nature, we are judgment. Right? And I'll give you a sort of an example of this. You walk into a room for the first time with new people. What do we start to do? We start to evaluate and make judgments about everything. It's just what we do, right? Those judgments come from our own internal experience, which is kind of, I think, what, you're kind of referring to, David, right? They come from that experience. They come from our cultural experience. They come from the media environment that we live inside. They come from our religious backgrounds, our ethnic and racial backgrounds, and the traditions inside of them. They come from all these places. We sort of mash them all up, and then we are judgmental. So being non-judgmental in some ways is impossible. What I would argue is that we become non-judgmental, or we can be non-judgmental when we are aware of the fact that we are judgmental. Right? So does that make sense? The awareness of that and the questioning of ourselves of, why do I think this way? Why do I think that, people who have blue eyes are smarter than people that have brown eyes? Not that I actually think that, but I do not have blue eyes, by the way. So all those blue-eyed people are smarter than me. But that we start to question that. Why do I think that way? Why do I think that that is the truth? Is there evidence to support that judgment? Right? So that's the first thing we need to do. And then as people are telling us their story, we have to try to stop judging that story through our subjective experience, our experience, but through their experience. We have to be able to transfer that. Is that hard to do? Hell yeah. That is really hard to do because we're in some ways going against our own nature. So, what I would say is that nobody here is non judgmental. It's just part of who we are. But we have the ability to manage that in a way that we can really see people for who they are, but we have to work at that. And so I think that by working at that and by being compassionate, right, by acting in a way, all of that supports the idea that we can step aside and recognize our judgments for what they are. Now, sometimes we make judgments about things and we're required to assess things and understand them, but we can do them in a way that is neutrally based as opposed to judgmentally based or biased. And we all have bias, I mean, just again. So I think the thing is we have to recognize this kind of crazy sort of thing about us is that we're biased, we're judgmental by nature, we are meaning seeking machines. We see something, we try to attach meaning to it. We have to recognize where that comes from. And we have to be able to, in a sense, step outside of ourselves to hear from others and their perspective without trying to, in a sense, even subtly persuade them to see the world as we see them. When you can do that, you will be super culturally competent because all of a sudden you'll be able to recognize that everybody is unique. And that's kind of what we go to. And you can add all sorts of stuff on top of that. So you can, you can study about cultures and understand different cultures in different periods of time and ways people think in their life, and you can absorb that. But if you're just absorbing that without understanding your own sense of how you're evaluating it, you're not getting the full impact of all those things. So that is kind of what we need to do with that. So hopefully, David, that answers your question. And we'll kind of go from there. So Amber writes, I think people who lived struggles tend to feel more compassion, in my opinion. So here's what I would say to that. Everybody lives struggles, right? So the way I look at that is that everybody has their own struggles. People deny them, people bury them, people don't acknowledge them, people don't see them as struggles. There's 100 things I could say. We all struggle, every one of us, in different ways. I had one student, maybe in this class, sort of talk about having it hard to understand how people who have so much money, food, jobs, a home to live in, can kind of get depressed when they have all these things, when this is a person who's lived with a lot less. And what I would say to that person, whoever that is, I think it was in this class, and I think I said it in the comments, is it just tells us that things and material things are not what gives us meaning and joy in life. I mean, it's nice to have them. I like living in a home. I like having food in the refrigerator. I have this thing that I do that it's just kind of where I am in my life. Every once in a while, I'll open our refrigerator in the house and, we have food, leftovers or, whatever. And I turn to my wife and I say, you know what? We are so blessed. I'm hungry. I'm not even that hungry. I can open my refrigerator and look at that. There's, I don't know, whatever's in there. There's leftovers from dinner last. Like, for instance, I had beef barley soup for lunch because it's just there waiting for me. I don't have to go out and hunt the animal to get the beef. I don't have to do hardly anything. As a matter of fact, my wife cooked it for me. All I had to do is pretty much put it in a bowl this morning or this afternoon in the microwave. How blessed am I, right? So I think the answer to that is material things is not what gives us meaning in life. It gives us comfort, and we need them. We need food. Happy to have it. It's 3 degrees below zero here. I'm happy to be in a heated house, although my office is in the basement and it's pretty cold down here right now, but not so cold that I can't survive, right? And I can always go upstairs and sit in front of the fireplace. We have a gas burning fireplace in the house. I mean, how blessed am I, right? We lose sight of that. So, that's what I would say. So, everybody struggles. I don't know what someone else's struggles are. Therefore, everybody can be compassionate. I don't let anybody off the hook. You have the ability to do it. Um, because, as the first precept in Buddhism would tell you, life is suffering. And as pretty much any major religious tradition or any ethical tradition will tell you, is life is difficult in some way, shape, or form. We're flawed, we're original sinners, you don't have to believe these things, but they're all sort of I would say they're all a verbalization of the same idea, is that we are imperfect beings. We all struggle. We all have to figure out the value of life. I have struggled recently with the concept of impermanence, and that comes from the fact that, and I may have mentioned this or maybe not, I don't know how well you guys know me, that my wife and I were caretakers for my mom, and she was in the house with hospice services till the day she passed, which was in November. And anybody who's been a caretaker knows that that is a pretty emotional laden experience, especially with someone that's close to you, like your own mom, but with anybody. And that what it really made me ruminate on is the concept of impermanence for me, right? The idea that everything we have will be gone someday. And that's just a reality. It's not a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's just a thing. And how do we live inside of that? And so having a lot of money doesn't change that. Having no money doesn't change that, right? So we have to learn to live inside. So therefore, everybody struggles. Therefore, everybody, in my personal opinion, it's my opinion. You don't have to agree with it. Everybody is able and can have compassion. And as helpers, we are professionalizing that compassion in some way. And that's what the job is to some extent. How we do it, where we do it, under what conditions we do it, which jobs we have that do it, those will vary. But it's kind of all there. All right, so I've got lots of new messages, which I absolutely love. Can you see me? I'm trying to zoom in on my phone. I don't really know the answer. I'm not sure I can. Kind of. So yeah, I can see you moving around there. All right. Now there is. I think I got it. Okay, this is all about the camera. All right. Somebody said sorry to hear that. I assume it's about my mother passing, so I appreciate that. Thank you. But that was a really profound experience. We have profound experiences in our life, and it really impacted me in ways I'm still unpacking. And I go to a bereavement counselor, and so again, we all have those struggles and experiences regardless of the other things in there. So, all right. Any questions about all that lovely stuff? All right. All right. All right. Let me get to my other notes. All right. Fingers are cold. I've been down here working for a couple of hours and I can have this big heater in front of me, but when it's this cold, this basement, which is nice and finished, and it's a great room in the summer, it's fantastic, but it's cold out here. All right. All right. So one of the things that I wanted to talk a little bit about, and I think this is important. Well, two things. Hopefully, I can get to two things today. So it talks about the characteristics of a human service professional, and there's a lot written about it. These ideas, and I asked you in your assignments to focus on the ones in the in the book, in terms of those. And there's a couple I always like to highlight. So one of the ones that I like to highlight is the idea of cognitive complexity. And the reason I like to highlight that is because I think we live in a world where we don't engage in enough cognitive complexity. And what I mean by cognitive complexity is that when we see something, and this is similar to what I talked about with judgment, it's a form of engaging in cognitive complexity. But when we think about this, and I want you to think about this for yourself, is how deeply do we really think about something? So, how do we really address the nuance in things? And I'll give you an example of what I mean. So, a lot of times in this world, you know, we are asked these kind of questions about either this or that. So, where I live, we have a new congressperson was elected, and I got an email because I'm on these email lists from him. His name is Tony Weed. I did not vote for him. But that's neither here nor there. He won, in my opinion, unfortunately, but that's my opinion. And the question he asked was, should um, transgender men who are women, who identify as women, should they play in female sports? And I'm thinking to myself, this is the question you're asking me? I was being judgmental here, right? So they're asking me some poll question on a pretty complex kind of issue that's a yes or no thing that impacts less than 0.1% of Americans. You're not asking me a question about, let's say, the cost of health insurance, which pretty much affects everybody, or the cost of prescription drugs, which affects everybody. But what you're doing is you're playing to something with a really simple question that oversimplifies a really complex issue. We in our culture tend to do that all the time. It's just sort of what we do. We think that things are either or. And I would argue for you that either or rarely exists, that everything is on some continuum, and there are all sorts of internal and external conditions that might impact that answer. Now, there are some things I think that are yes or no questions, like should I walk up to a stranger on the street and shoot them with a 45 in the head? Well, the answer to that question is no, right? That's a pretty much a yes or no questions. But most of what we face in life isn't that, right? It's not that. Most of what we face is nuance. And when we're dealing with people, it's really complicated. And so we are required to see through the veneer. That's what cognitive complexity is about, to see through the veneer, to see the pieces. So when we are doing an assessment, whether it's formal, semi-formal, informal, or off the cuff, we are needing to engage this cognitive complexity, this really deeper understanding. The first place we should practice is with ourselves, right? That's the easiest place to practice, to sort of think about, why do I do what I do? What drives me? What motivates me? What are the things that impacted me? And really, how did they impact me? So the example for me currently is kind of like my mother's passing. I mean, I was the one that found her, not that it was a surprise. We knew she was dying at the very end. If you've ever been around that kind of death, it's pretty apparent. It's not like, oh, I woke up one morning, walked into her bedroom, and she was fine yesterday, and the next day she was gone. It wasn't that. But, I found her, and it really got me thinking about so many things for me, right? That it really prompted me to look at things in this really deep way, to understand things that are really, I don't know, call it spiritual, metaphysical, religious, whatever kind of method or thing that stirs deep inside of us. But when we're doing this work, in a sense, I mean, we don't have to necessarily go there, but we have to understand people at some deeper level. What are their motivators? How do their motivators make sense? Why do they do what we do? Um, Amber writes, to just comment on this, that her father's passing also was her motivation. It made you look at life in a different perspective. Right. I mean, events happen that are, in a sense, transformative for us. And they don't happen overnight, but it's a process. Now, when we're working with people, we have to look at this. We have to be in touch with that side of us all the time. Simple answers typically don't exist for complex problems. They just don't. And working with people is a complex problem. Why is someone a drug addict? That's a complex question, right? I don't know. Everybody's reasoning and path to that can be very different. But it's complex. Just because it was our path, if we're someone who's a peer who's had that experience. So just because I've had the experience of being a caretaker and experience my mother's death doesn't mean someone else's is going to be the same. I can be empathetic maybe in a specific way to that someone else can't, who doesn't have that exact experience, but their experience is always still going to be different. And if I impose my view on that because I think I know, then I'm making a mistake and I should reevaluate that, right? So that kind of idea of cognitive complexity is really important because we have to go there. That I think is a really important thing. So that's one of the things that I want to talk about. So what I'm asking you to do is when you read the stuff I give you, think about it in that way. And I do certain things on purpose, and I'll share this with you. I had this conversation with my son actually before class. But let's see if it's this class or my other class. So I'll have to know whether you guys will know what I'm talking about. No, it was my other class. Okay. Anyway, so in my other class, let me get this up for you because I think it's a good example. I just got to find it. All right. Okay. So in my other class, I teach interviewing, and I talk about compassion there, as well as other things. But I quoted the Tao Te Ching. So the Tao Te Ching is an ancient Chinese text written by a man by the name of Lao Tzu. And Tao means just the way. And it's kind of wisdom. It's what they would call a wisdom text. It's somewhat religious in nature, but not in the way that we in the Western world would think about religion. So, but anyway, but in it, it's a little book. I keep one at my desk. This is my copy of it. It's like 75 sort of short poems in a sense. And I read through it all the time. Anyway, so in it, the quote is there are three jewels I cherish. With compassion, you will be able to be brave. With moderation, you will be able to give to others. With humility, you'll be able to become a great leader. And so what I did is I asked the students the question to think about this, and why does compassion support bravery? Now, there is no right answer to that. I mean, we can argue about the definition of compassion and the definition of bravery. We can, but each of us, if we look at that and we think about that, right? We use our cognitive abilities to train our mind to think about things at a deeper level. What does that mean to me? How do I interpret the idea that compassion will allow you to be brave? Well, what does that mean? Right? So what I'm saying to you is you have to look at the world. It's a mystery. And the answers aren't simple. You got to go and dig at them. And if you just look at the kind of a cursory, superficial answer and move on, you're not getting the benefit of all the wisdom that exists. And the only person that can do that for you is you, right? So I can put this out there. Students can read it, and there'll be students saying, what does this have to do with interview? And I could say, well, it has to do with you. You're the person engaged in the helping process by using an interview. Therefore, it's connected to you. And they'll think, okay, maybe, but I don't know. That's not going to be on some test somewhere. So maybe I don't have to learn it. So again, what I'm saying to you is you got to engage. And cognitive complexity is about that. So do you have that? Do you have that intellectual curiosity, the ability to dig deeper, the ability to get at something and never really be satisfied that that's the only thing there is? There may be other things there. And to kind of try to sort of dig deeper into that. That's what this requires. I would argue that life requires that. So what you're learning here, they're good life lessons, right? I mean, that's the way I would see it. But as a professional, that's really important. Because if you're just shuffling people through to get them some end, that's helpful. And that can be a compassionate act. But if you really want to be good at this, you gotta go the extra mile. You just gotta go there. And the thing I would argue is you're all capable of it. Every one of you. You can do it. You just have to choose to engage in it. Not constantly. It's like not the only thing that rolls through your mind. I watch inane television sometimes. I watched Hollywood Squares the other night. I would say there's pretty little cognitive complexity in watching that. But again, that doesn't necessarily define who I am as a professional. When I come in here, I'm going to make sure that that's kind of where I am. That's kind of where I'm coming from. So, any responses, questions to that? Does any of this make sense to you? And if so, how do you understand it? So, message me and or post, and I'd be interested in your thoughts. Don't be shy, or I'd prefer if you weren't shy. I can't tell you not to be shy. What was the name of the book that I showed? So this little book here, this is the Tao. It's I mean, there's a million, right? Exactly. Thank you, Christy. There's a million there's many different translations. It's just a book of little poems, and so there are 78 of them, 79, 77. Uh, it's interesting. So or 80, I don't know, 79 of them. There's a quote in the last one. I'll read this to you. Number 79, it says, "A virtuous person will always do the right thing. Persons with no virtue will take advantage of others." Give that some thought. So anyway, there are lots of translations of it. It's pretty easy to read, but it's the kind of thing you should read over and over again. So because depending on where you are in your own mind and your own life progression, you might need and understand these things differently. All right. So Amber writes, it makes a lot of sense to dig deeper. Whoops. Let's see. In order to understand and be able to help others. Oh, my wife is cooking. I can smell it. It smells really good. She's making a quiche. So I bet there are onions and bacon and stuff cooking. So I'm going to be so distracted now. I do love to eat. So one of my favorite things. Makes a lot of sense to dig deeper in order to understand to be able to help others. Yeah. You know, yes, I think that's true. Marlena writes, I think cognitive complexity allows us to be more compassionate. I think so. I would agree with that. I mean, I think because it challenges our own notion of things. And I think to be compassionate, we have to do that. I mean, I think it's required if we want to be more compassionate. The ability to look beyond what is in front of us and see how a person got there, it can be enlightening to their situation and allow us to help. Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, I just do. I would agree. I would agree with you. You can show bravery sometimes when having compassion on hard topics instead of trying to avoid issues facing it and helping someone through. Yeah, I think that's true. I think that's a way to interpret that. I think the beauty about things like that is probably 100 ways to interpret that, and all of them in some way are correct. And that just shows how complex things are. So Marie writes also that my coworker has recently lost her father and her daughter now is in the hospital. It was very emotional. but I put myself aside and put yourself, you would be there for her. Yeah, and sometimes honestly, just holding somebody's hand through a difficult moment can be a very compassionate act and can alleviate distress and suffering. The feeling of not being alone can be very powerful. And the feeling of being alone can be very damaging. So there are lots of ways to be compassionate, even if uncomfortable for us. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, you can be compassionate and not be comfortable in doing it. I think that's true. Those two things can definitely both be true. And you can be comfortable in doing it. That can be true. Yeah. So I think all of those things are true. The other characteristics are, of course, important. Acceptance, non-judgment. We talked a little bit about that. Uh, cultural competence. We talked a little bit about that. So, I think all of those are true. So, all right, I do want to move on a little bit. I love the sort of philosophical stuff because I think it's really where the meat is for us as people. Because to be good at this, I believe we have to explore ourselves. I mean, that's really where it all starts from. We are the ones engaging in helping. The better we understand who we are, the better we are able to manage our own things and understand our own struggles, the better we are as helpers, the more that we don't impose ourselves on others when we're helping, but we empower them to be able to impose their own sense of self over themselves. That's that's kind of where I think kind of it really belongs and kind of goes. All right, it's 5 after 5 in my world, and sit in front of the fire after this class. Whew. Anyway, all right. So I will keep the next topic relatively whatever. I always say short. I'm not good at short, but let me go back to my notes. Oh, I'm in the wrong class. That's why I can't find my notes. I opened up my other class for the quote. Sorry about that. All right. So the other thing, which is more of a concrete thing, I believe, get to it. All right. So I did want to talk a little bit about kind of the field as a whole. I didn't want to leave that out, right? So a number of you in your assignments, and I haven't read them all, talked about wanting to be a counselor. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to be a counselor. But I really want you to see the field as much, much, much wider. You know, um, in order to, so number one, I was trying to get a number. That really is possible to do. But across America, there are upwards of, you know, 500,000 people who are human service workers. So counselors, therapists, aides, parole officers, working in a inpatient setting, outpatient setting, hospice workers, group home workers, crisis intervention counselors, community organizers, people who work in, boys clubs and girls clubs, who work in anti-poverty programs, right? It's everywhere. The way I see the human service field, the job, is everybody's familiar with the idea of infrastructure, right, in a community. So infrastructure is roads, bridges, buildings. It's all of that kind of architecture of community, right? Every community has it, Community I live in has it. We support that infrastructure. We have maintenance workers that fix those things. They fix the roads. They repair traffic lights when they go out. You guys are having a snowstorm. You probably, some people, if you have that heavy wet snow, which is pretty much the only kind of snow that ever falls in Charleston because it never gets super cold. Power lines come down. That's all infrastructure that people fix. Human service workers are the infrastructure of our human communities. We work in all of these programs so that when you go to work in the morning and you have a child and you have to take them to a child care, there's a place to take them. And that's infrastructure. It supports your ability to go make a living. And there are people that work in that. So anytime you see somebody working in a place or engaging in a job that supports the community, the human people in the community, that's infrastructure. That's human infrastructure. That's what we are. That's what human service workers are. We are the infrastructure in that community. So think about all of those jobs. So, for instance, in my world, when my mom was dying and we had in home hospice, we actually had them in the house from March until November, so about 8 months. And we had all these people coming to our house, and they, in a sense, saved my life. Um, all of those people, regardless of their roles, were all human service people, right? They were doing that. We had a couple of aides that came in to give my mom baths and showers and change her and do all those things. We had a housekeeper come in to clean her space. We had a nurse come in to do the nursing part of it. We had a social worker that kind of helped us. We had respite workers where we could send my mom for a couple of days so my wife and I could like go out to dinner and maybe, go out overnight. We went up to Door County, which is kind of like going to Hilton Head in a sense for you guys, same kind of thing, for a weekend. So we could actually just like be together, right? Every one of those people was a human service worker in some way doing a different job. And so those are the jobs that are available to you. So when you're thinking about what can I be, you can be a therapist. I go to a bereavement counselor now, so that person is a therapist, counselor, and they are a human service worker. But it's also all of those other jobs. The world and the potential professional things you can engage in are massive. So what I would ask you to do is to explore some of those things. Some of you already know them because you probably have engaged with these systems in some way, shape, or form already. But what I would ask you to do is to engage in them outside of your own experience. So, find out about other types of what is it like to work in a program that supports people with cognitive impairment, with kids with autism, mental health issues, people who are in poverty, people who are victims of domestic abuse, people who, have long-term unemployment. Uh, you know, what are those programs? I mean, I could, and I'm going to try to get somebody actually in here from the Respite program to talk to class, although we only have a few weeks and I don't know if I'm able to arrange that. But learn about these things because they are part of that human service infrastructure, and all of this overlaps, right? I worked in the program as a teacher, and people would think, I need to learn about this because I want to work with this group of people, or I want to do this because I want to work with this group of people. Well, what I can tell you is it all mixes together. You might, for instance, I use hospice as an example, work in a hospice program in some way, go to somebody's house because there's in-home hospice. And I know there are internships that we have at Trident. We used, I think, St. Roper St. Francis. I don't know if they still do, but we had people who go to hospice through internships through there. But inside of that, you could be dealing with all sorts of family strife because it exists, or there could be abuse issues, or there could be drug abuse issues, or there could be poverty issues, or there could be all sorts of issues. So, regardless of where you end up, you're working with any system or any number of combinations of what it is that you might be doing. And you are doing what I would refer to as a mitzvah, right? A mitzvah in the Jewish religion is basically a good deed. So, the mitzvah literally means commandment. It's a Hebrew word. But really, what it implies is that we are required to do good deeds, to be a good deed doer, like from the Wizard of Oz, right? At the end, the wizard says, you have to be a good deed doer. That's what you want to be. It's a righteous person. It's in every faith tradition, every cultural tradition, and that's kind of what you do, right? That's the role, and there are lots of places to do it, and all the skills that you learn, interviewing, counseling, um, you know, learning about how communication, learning about how to approach people, about compassion, about things at work, about how to do research, how to learn about things, right? All of these things will be useful regardless of the role that you play inside of the field. And I can give you a list of jobs that you might have. I can never give you a list of all of them. But what I can tell you is inside of these, you'll use all of these skills and open yourself up to the experience to find where you fit at the moment, recognizing that in 5 years, you might fit in a completely different place because of your openness to the experience that you're having and recognizing how wide a berth you have in your own career choices. And there's something really beautiful about that ability to kind of move with where you are and still be a helper. Yeah, guardian ad litem. We actually used to have an internship at I think the one in Berkeley County, and maybe the one in Charleston County too. I don't remember. I think we did, and then they had some personnel and issues, and so that ended. But that might be up and running again because that goes back a number of years. So again, right, we can do all of those kinds of things and engage, right? And then use the tools that you learn in the classroom to reflect on the experience and learn from it on your own. Because in the end, the learning is always on you, right? I can give you information. I can sit here and talk for hours, which I'm perfectly capable of doing, but you have to figure out how to learn from it. That's your job. I cannot do that for you. But those are all the potential jobs that you can have. So think, especially at this moment in your learning career, when you're at the beginning, think big, right? Explore those possibilities. Find the right fit for you at this moment. It isn't the end. I can tell you, I've worked in developmental disabilities, residential services, mental health. I have experience now with hospice services. I've been a teacher. I've worked with kids. I've worked in crisis services. I've worked at all levels. I've created programs. I've worked one on one. I've worked with families. It's all open to you. We are on a movement. Open yourselves up. Don't say this is what I want to be, right? Say this is where I am today. What I want to be is I want to explore what my options are. So what I do is the thing that has meaning to me, right? That is the most important thing, right? That it fills you up in a way that feels like you are contributing in a positive thing. I have a very strong belief that our job is to put good into the world. Human service workers are people, our job is to put good in the world. There's enough bad in the world that our job is to counteract that by doing good. There's enough cruelty in the world. Our job is to be compassionate. There's enough doubt and in the world. Our job is to give people hope. And we can do them in all of these ways. And so, you have this opportunity in your life. And, I hope that as you listen to this feels like, yeah, this feels like a valuable thing to do. Because in the end, everything we do is impermanent. But if we leave good in the world, the good stays, I believe. That's what we can leave behind. So How do I do that? Okay. All right. So we're having a little side combo there. Okay. All right. Let's see. What else do I have? All right. So, any questions about any of that? Any thoughts, comments, reflections, ideas? Always interested in what you're thinking as I'm talking. No. Okay. Okay. Fair enough. All right. So the last thing is the paper. So I did the roster verifications today, so I know who's left in class. I did. I'm going to check to make sure I actually did this. I sometimes do things and then they'll make them available to you guys accidentally, so I don't open them up. So I'm double checking now. But in the content section of the class, I've opened up the online stuff for next week, so that's available. And then the final paper information, there's a video in there. So what I'm going to do is I am going to, between today and probably Thursday, before I'm actually going to the Milwaukee Bucks game on Thursday. We're headed down to Milwaukee and staying the night and coming up. So I'm going to try to get this done before that. Um, and I'm going to assign you your papers. I'm going to do it pretty much at random, spread out. You've seen the topics, and hopefully you've listened to the video about what it is I want in those papers, and you'll have that information, and you can go about and writing your papers. Hopefully, this will help you see an aspect in the human services system from the long view, right? Because the system evolves. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, and I can tell you the world I walked into in my first human services job, which I think actually goes back to 1976, and the world we live in today is very different, as well as still being the same. So both things can be true. So I want you to sort of explore that and get a sense of kind of where we've come and how the external culture impacts the way services are delivered and the way we even think about them. We are living, in my opinion, in rather turbulent times, um, ones that, in all honesty, for me, I find a bit disconcerting and frightening. But here we are, and our job is to still do good, but to understand the trend over time around how human services fits in and how impacted we are by external cultural, social, and events that occur in our world. So hopefully you can learn a little of that from doing the paper. So, all right. So it's 21 minutes after the hour. And so the last thing, I mean, any questions anybody has is fine. But what I'm really looking for are just your reflections on our last hour and a half together, in terms of what are your takeaways from all of this. So if you wouldn't mind just typing something in that would please your instructor, which is always a good thing to do, and we'll go from there. I'll give you a minute to do that. Okay. So nobody has any thoughts as of yet. Are the Bucks your NBA team? Yes, they are. Yep, I am I would say a pretty avid Milwaukee Buck fan and a Green Bay Packer fan, since I live about 25 miles from Green Bay. So, among other things. Okay. So, Marlena, term got compassion as an action. Um, Michaela, about the different roles. Good. That's a good thing. And found it interesting to hear other people's viewpoints, which I think is a very good thing. Everything was very insightful. Okay, well, I mean, if it helps you process information, I'm glad. So good. Uh, yeah, no two situations are ever exactly alike. Every situation is unique. I mean, I really can't stress that enough. I think it's a mistake we sometimes make. We sort of project our own experience, assuming that other people kind of have it in a general sense, and really that's something we need to let go of. Recognize that there is that uniqueness there. So I really, you got to practice that too. Class was delightful. Okay, I'm glad. I am happy to hear that. Um, Compassion is more of an action. I also have family. Oh, someone that lives in Brussels. Well, well, well. Then you know Claudia, the local area, in some way, shape, or form. So, yep, that's nice. Kind of a bit of a connection for us. So, very good. Okay. I took that in order to be compassionate and understanding. Sometimes you have to dig deeper. Yeah, I'd say you pretty much always have to dig deeper. Digging deeper is always a good thing. My reflection from our meeting today is that English is a very broad career, and hearing so many things has opened up my mind. Good. I'm glad. I think opening opening your minds is part of what I'm trying to do. So I need to apply that example you mentioned about how you reacted with your wife when she was stressed. Yes, not a lot easier said than done sometimes. But I like that. Very good. You agree? Agreed. All right. Fantastic. I like learning about how we don't have to accept and or agree with the person's wrongdoings to be compassionate. All right. Yeah, that's right. And I would reframe the word wrongdoings into another person's choices and actions and behaviors. Right? I mean, and I think that's true. So I would agree. I'm glad that you can see the connection there, as well as the common ground why people with certain things is not enough for them. Yep. As humans, I agree that we are a greedy species and that we shouldn't use problems as competitions. Yeah. Um, I'm not sure I agree with the word greedy, but I would say we are flawed and imperfect. And sometimes that leads to being greedy or cruel or mean or selfish. But we also need to be self compassionate. As much as we are compassionate with others, we should engage in compassion for ourselves. We should never forget that. Compassion starts at home. I think that's really important. Let's see. Can compassion be a feeling first and then an action? I mean, yeah. I mean, we feel compassion, but we really want to act on it, right? We need to think of how to turn that feeling into something of an action. So, yeah, it is a feeling. I mean, things can be more than one thing. So that's, you know, yeah, everybody agrees with you. I agree with you. Joining this evening help confirm I'm joining the right field. Well, that's good. Um, yeah. So you're right. You have a lot of self work to do. So, Marie, you can join everybody in the world. We all have a lot of self work to do. And I think we just need to accept that as part of the process of living. That work never ends until our lives end. And I don't know what happens after that. So I don't know. Maybe it goes on, maybe it doesn't. I can't speak to that. Everything with class was good. It definitely opened my eyes about being judgmental. Well, good. All right. So lots of hearts, lots of great comments. I really appreciate that. That helps me kind of understand the way you're understanding things and how you're thinking. It is 27 minutes after. Oh, another comment. I see now that human services many different career paths. Yep. And also, we do not have to agree with someone to feel compassion. Yep. Good. All right. So you are taking in the lessons that I'm trying to convey to you and think about that, right? Think about these things. I'm glad you enjoyed the class. That was good. All right. All right. Well, I'm going to let you go. I'm going to run upstairs because that dinner of mine smells really super good now. My wife is a great cook, so I am very blessed and fortunate. Um, so that's a good thing. And thank you. Have a good night. Enjoy your journey. So everybody, you have a good night. You stay safe in the snow. I would give you my snow blower and snow shovel, but we live too far away. And I know I looked at your weather. It's going to be like 50 degrees over the weekend. So I can only feel so much empathy for you. So, but anyway, you guys have a good day. Take care of yourselves. And you love how I speak about my wife. Well, yeah, thank you. Well, I am a very fortunate and blessed person when it comes to that relationship. So, and we will go from there. All right, you guys take care.